November 17, 1944. The Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The hour was 04:30, and a biting cold hung heavy in the air, the temperature hovering just above freezing at 2 degrees Celsius. A thin, almost imperceptible mist clung to the gnarled branches of the ancient trees, their dark forms looming like silent sentinels in the pre-dawn gloom. The air, usually filled with the distant rumble of artillery or the sporadic crackle of small arms fire, was unnervingly quiet, a silence that felt more like a held breath than peace. Deep within a forward observation post, barely more than a shallow dugout concealed beneath a tangle of pines and camouflaged netting, Private First Class James "Jimmy" Castellano shivered, not from the cold, but from an intense, almost frantic focus. His breath plumed in the frigid air as he hunched over a collection of maps, his hands, calloused and smudged, moving with a delicate precision that belied the harshness of his surroundings. Jimmy was a reconnaissance scout with the 28th Infantry Division, 110th Regiment, a unit known for its resilience in the brutal Hürtgen campaign. Yet, his method for interpreting the war-torn landscape was anything but conventional. Spread before him were several standard-issue army maps, but they were almost unrecognizable beneath his meticulous additions. Castellano wasn't using the precise grid-line annotations favored by military cartographers. Instead, he was engaged in an act that, to his fellow scouts, bordered on madness. With a well-worn set of colored pencils, the kind children might use for their drawings, he was meticulously applying hues and shades to the topographical lines, sketching fantastical, almost whimsical illustrations directly onto the official documents. A deep ravine might be outlined in jagged scarlet, a dense thicket of pines rendered in mottled indigo, and a particularly treacherous section of marshland, adorned with swirling patterns of sickly green and brown. Tucked beside him, dog-eared and battered, was a collection of children's storybooks, Grimm's fairy tales, Aesop's fables, even a well-loved copy of Winnie the Pooh. He referenced these books not for comfort but for visual cues, transposing their imagery onto the grim reality of the battlefront. Sergeant Frank Morrison, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too much, peered over Castellano's shoulder, a look of utter exasperation etched onto his face. "Castellano, what in the blazes are you doing now? Kindergarten cartography. We're fighting a war, not decorating a nursery school." His voice was a low growl, meant to convey both irritation and a grudging tolerance for the scouts' eccentricities. Other scouts in the dugout, huddled close against the cold, snickered quietly. They had long ago grown accustomed to Castellano's peculiar habits, but they still found them endlessly amusing. They called his technique ridiculous, a childish indulgence in a man's war. "Crayon intelligence," one of them had scoffed just yesterday. "Next, he'll be marking enemy positions with glitter glue." Castellano ignored the barbs, his brow furrowed in concentration. He knew what they thought. He'd heard it all before. He was an oddity, an art school dropout in a uniform trying to make sense of the senseless with tools designed for innocence. But he also knew something they didn't, something he couldn't quite articulate in their language of grids and coordinates. He saw the forest differently, felt its contours and dangers in a way that standard military training simply didn't account for. He saw the story the landscape was telling, and he translated it into a language he understood. Sergeant Morrison sighed, shaking his head. "Look, Jimmy, I get it, you're an artist, but we've got a recon mission in a few hours. We need solid intel, not some Dr. Seuss roadmap." He stalked off, muttering something about the lack of common sense among the new recruits. The other scouts chuckled, sharing knowing glances. They believed their sergeant was right. Castellano's methods were undeniably ridiculous. What they couldn't possibly know, what no one in that cold, damp dugout could fathom in that bleak hour, was the ironic truth that would unfold with the morning light. In just 6 hours, those very same men who laughed at his crayons, who mocked his unconventional maps, would find themselves owing him their lives. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of Private First Class James Castellano, an art school dropout whose childish mapping system, dismissed as utterly ridiculous by his superiors and peers, would expose a perfectly concealed German ambush that the entire military intelligence apparatus had completely missed. It's a story of how a unique mind, armed with nothing but colored pencils and an artist's perception, changed the course of a battle and saved hundreds of American lives in the brutal cauldron of the Hurtgen Forest. Castellano's journey into the heart of the Hurtgen Forest, and indeed into the US Army, was as unconventional as his mapping techniques. Before the war, James "Jimmy" Castellano had been a struggling commercial artist in the bustling streets of Philadelphia. He possessed an innate talent for drawing, a keen eye for color, and a vibrant imagination, but the harsh realities of the commercial art world proved a difficult canvas for his unique vision. He found himself constantly at odds with clients who wanted conformity, not creativity, and his portfolio, filled with fantastical landscapes and richly textured characters, often drew polite rejections. He dropped out of art school after 2 years, disillusioned but not defeated, believing his true calling simply hadn't revealed itself yet. What set Castellano apart was not just his artistic skill, but a deeply ingrained neurological trait, a powerful, almost eidetic visual memory coupled with a form of synesthesia. For Jimmy, terrain features weren't just geographical markers. They evoked colors, shapes, and even emotional responses. A jagged ridge might feel angry red to him, a dense, dark forest segment, mournful purple, and a gentle slope leading into a hidden valley could be a comforting green, but with a hint of suspicious yellow. He processed the world through a filter of sensory associations, a gift that was utterly baffling to those around him, especially in the rigid, pragmatic environment of the military. His initial attempts to explain this to his superiors were met with blank stares. Captain Robert Hayes, the battalion intelligence officer, a man who prided himself on his meticulous adherence to military protocols and established intelligence-gathering methods, was among the first to dismiss Castellano's artistic impressions. Hayes, a former history professor, understood the importance of comprehensive intelligence, but he dealt in facts, figures, and established doctrines, not colored pencils and fairy tales. The standard military mapping protocols of 1944 were a stark contrast to Castellano's methods. Every soldier was trained to read maps based on a precise grid coordinate system, elevation markers indicated by contour lines, and a standardized array of tactical symbols. A blue line meant a river, a dotted line a trail, a cross a church. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for subjective interpretation. Maps were tools of absolute precision, designed to convey information uniformly and efficiently across the vast apparatus of an army. The standard army issue maps were typically at a 1/25 Eros-Eron scale, meaning one unit on the map represented 25 Eros-Eron units in reality. These maps were excellent for strategic planning and large-scale troop movements, providing an overview of broad terrain features. Castellano, however, needed more. He needed to feel the ground to understand its hidden nuances. He supplemented his standard maps with personal overlays, often drawing his own at a more detailed 1/10 Eros-Eron scale, filling them with his unique visual and emotional markers. A treacherous, narrow ravine, known for German snipers, wouldn't just be marked with a standard danger symbol. On Castellano's map, it would become Big Bad Wolf's Den, outlined with aggressive red and black swirls, a visual shorthand for mortal peril. A section of forest where German patrols frequently appeared would be depicted with shadowy, hunched figures, reminiscent of the Wicked Witch from Hansel and Gretel. These weren't just childish doodles, they were a complex, deeply personal language that allowed him to encode and retrieve critical intelligence in a way that standard maps simply could not. This unconventional approach, while effective for Castellano, repeatedly landed him in hot water. Battalion Commander Colonel William Bradford, a stern, by-the-book officer, was particularly vexed by Castellano's methods. "Private Castellano," he had boomed during one particularly heated exchange, "this is not an art class. This is a war. If your maps aren't intelligible to anyone else, they are useless. Your creative cartography is unprofessional conduct, and if it continues, I will remove you from reconnaissance duty. Is that clear?" Castellano had saluted, his face impassive, but inside, a quiet frustration simmered. He knew he saw things others didn't, and he desperately wanted to prove that his ridiculous approach held a hidden, vital truth. The Hurtgen Forest campaign, which began in the early autumn of 1944, would prove to be one of the bloodiest and most protracted engagements in American military history. It was a grim, grinding battle against a determined enemy and an unforgiving landscape. Over 3 months, this dark, dense woodland would claim an astonishing 33,000 American casualties, a testament to the brutal fighting and the effectiveness of the German defenses. The 28th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Bloody Bucket for the crimson keystone patch on their uniforms, found themselves thrown into this meat grinder. The days leading up to November 17th, specifically November 15th and 16th, were no different. The American advance was slow, methodical, and painfully costly. Every meter gained was paid for in blood. The forest itself seemed an ally to the Germans. Its ancient, towering trees, often reaching 100 feet or more, created a perpetually twilight world beneath their thick canopy. The undergrowth was dense, tangled, and often booby-trapped. Visibility was abysmal, and the terrain was a treacherous maze of steep ravines, muddy streams, and rocky outcrops. From the German perspective, this was precisely the environment they sought to exploit. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, a shrewd and highly competent officer commanding a company within the Wehrmacht's 275th Infantry Division, understood the Hurtgens' unique advantages. Richter was a master of defensive warfare, and he viewed the forest not as an obstacle, but as a weapon. His strategy was simple. Use the dense cover and broken terrain to channel American forces into carefully constructed killing zones, where interlocking fields of fire from machine guns and pre-registered mortar positions could decimate them. Richter's men had spent weeks digging in, camouflaging their positions with an almost fanatical dedication, transforming the natural environment into a lethal trap. Castellano, with his small reconnaissance patrol, was constantly out in this perilous environment, moving silently, observing. He would typically spend hours on patrol, returning with his usual combination of official reports and his vividly annotated personal maps. He meticulously recorded observations, the type of trees, the slope of the ground, the scent of pine needles mixed with the metallic tang of expended ammunition. He knew his methods were mocked, but he couldn't stop. It was how his mind worked, how he processed the world. One afternoon, during a deep reconnaissance patrol on November 15th, Castellano was charting a particularly dense section of forest along a potential American advance route. He moved with a practiced stealth, his eyes constantly scanning, his ears alert to every rustle. He noted the typical signs of battle: shell craters, splintered trees, the debris of combat. But as he plotted the details onto his map, using his colored pencils, he began to notice subtle inconsistencies, things that his standard-trained companions either missed or dismissed. He saw patterns in the tree damage that didn't quite match typical artillery impacts. Some trees were felled too cleanly, others had uniform bark abrasions that seemed too regular, too intentional. He pulled out his trusty yellow pencil, the color he associated with subtle warnings or unusual markers. On his personal map, he began to draw a series of small, intermittent yellow dots, leading into a particularly dense part of the forest. He labeled this section, in his mental shorthand, Hansel and Gretel Breadcrumb Trail. It was his way of noting artificial path markers, subtle clues that someone or something had been attempting to create a trail or guide through the otherwise trackless undergrowth, perhaps by snapping branches in a specific way or disturbing the ground cover too evenly. It was a faint, almost subconscious pattern, but to Castellano's synesthetic eye, it screamed artificiality. Later, when other scouts went out to verify the area, following standard observation protocols, they found nothing unusual. "Just more trees, Jimmy," Sergeant Morrison had reported back with a shrug. "Nothing to suggest an ambush. Looks clear." Castellano nodded, but a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He trusted his colors, his instincts, but the lack of corroboration from the others gnawed at him. Maybe Morrison was right, he thought, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. Maybe I am seeing things that aren't there. But the yellow dots on his map, the breadcrumb trail, persisted as a silent, insistent warning. The evening of November 16th found Castellano back in the company command post, presenting his latest findings to Captain Hayes. The captain, already exhausted from the day's ceaseless reports of minor skirmishes and stubborn German resistance, listened with a weary patience as Castellano unrolled his heavily annotated maps. The standard map, with its neatly marked patrol routes and confirmed observations, was quickly set aside. It was the personal, crayon-laden map that drew Hayes's gaze. Castellano pointed to the area he had marked with the yellow breadcrumb trail, now further embellished with what he called color-coded wrongness. He explained, his voice low and earnest. "Captain, the trees here, they're too symmetrically damaged. It's not like shell fragments, and the underbrush, it's too uniform, too tidy. It's like someone tried to make it look natural, but they overdid it. The colors just don't feel right for that section of the forest." He had shaded the entire suspect area with an unsettling blend of muted greens and browns, overlaid with an almost luminescent, sickly yellow. He had even given this section a specific unsettling label, Grandmother's House, from the story of Little Red Riding Hood. "It's like something pretending to be what it's not," he explained to a bewildered Hayes. "It looks safe, welcoming even, but the colors tell me it's a trap. It's too perfect for a place that's seen so much fighting." Captain Hayes, a man of logic and order, found himself in a strange position. He was skeptical, deeply so. The visual evidence Castellano presented was certainly compelling in its detail, but it was also utterly subjective. Yet there was something in the scout's conviction, in the sheer specificity of his wrongness, that intrigued him. He had seen too many good men die to dismiss any potential intelligence out of hand, no matter how unorthodox its source. He leaned over the map, scrutinizing the bizarre melange of colors and childlike illustrations. "You're saying this isn't just natural forest, Private? You think it's disguised?" Castellano nodded vehemently. "Yes, sir. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing, Captain. The colors are screaming it." Reluctantly, but with a growing sense of unease, Hayes made a decision. He ordered immediate aerial reconnaissance photos of the sector Castellano had highlighted, hoping that the objective eye of the camera, unclouded by subjective perception, might confirm or refute the scout's wild claims. The next morning, the reconnaissance photos arrived. They were standard black and white aerial shots, crisp and high resolution, taken by a P-38 Lightning at 5,000 feet. Intelligence officers pored over them, comparing them to existing topographical maps. To their trained eyes, the photos revealed nothing conclusive. The sector appeared as dense, unremarkable forest, scarred by the usual signs of battle. There were no obvious fortifications, no telltale tracks, no distinct patterns that suggested a large enemy presence. The terrain looked, as expected, like a part of the Hürtgen forest, but Castellano saw something else. He asked to see the photos, and under a harsh, bare bulb, he studied them, not for grid lines or standard tactical symbols, but for anomalies in light and shadow. He held the photos at different angles, squinting, his artist's eye seeking out subtle shifts in texture and tone. He noticed micro-shadows, faint, almost imperceptible dark lines and shapes that ran against the natural grain of the forest floor, appearing in areas where shadows should have been uniform. To a conventional observer, these were just photographic artifacts, slight variations in light. To Castellano, they were clues. "See here, Captain." He pointed a smudged finger at a cluster of nearly invisible dark spots. "These aren't natural shadows. They're too angular, too regular. It's like the forest is wearing a costume." He pulled out his tattered copy of Little Red Riding Hood. "It's like the wolf in sheep's clothing. The shadows are wearing a costume. It's German camouflage netting, sir. Tarn nets. They're using it to break up the outlines of something large underneath." German camouflage netting, or tarn nets, was indeed revolutionary. Unlike the cruder camouflage used by some Allied forces, the Germans had perfected the art of blending artificial materials with natural elements. Their nets were often woven with actual leaves, branches, and earth, creating a seamless integration with the environment. From the air and even often from the ground, These positions were almost impossible to detect, designed to melt into the natural patterns of the forest. Without Castellano's unique visual processing, these microshadows, these subtle costume lines, would have remained unseen, dismissed as nothing. Captain Hayes stood at a crossroads. Every piece of objective military intelligence pointed to a clear advance along the planned route. His most experienced intelligence officers had seen nothing amiss. Yet here was this private, this eccentric artist, describing a hidden danger with an unnerving conviction, using a language of colors and fairy tales, backed by observations that defied conventional interpretation. Hayes was a pragmatic man, but he was also a man who had learned that sometimes the most improbable sources held the most vital truths. He had to make a choice. And then he made a controversial, career-risking decision. He ordered the planned advance route delayed, based solely on one scout's ridiculous maps. It was 0200 hours on November 17th. The pre-dawn chill was intensifying, cutting through the thick woolen uniforms of the American soldiers. Captain Hayes, having spent the last hour and a half making his case, finally convinced a highly skeptical Colonel Bradford to alter the morning's plans. The battalion's main advance, scheduled to begin at 600, would be delayed by 4 crucial hours. In its place, Bradford reluctantly authorized a small reconnaissance in force, a 12-man patrol to investigate Castellano's suspected ambush site. The colonel made it clear, his voice laced with barely concealed annoyance, that this was a costly deviation, chewing up precious hours and resources based on what he still considered to be fanciful notions. The patrol was led by Sergeant Frank Morrison, the very man who had so often mocked Castellano's kindergarten cartography. Morrison was outwardly resentful of the assignment, muttering under his breath about chasing after ghosts with crayons. He was deeply skeptical, but orders were orders. Castellano, indispensable to navigating his own unique maps, was included as the patrol's guide. The tension between Morrison and Castellano was palpable as the patrol moved stealthily through the dark, silent forest. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on fallen leaves and the distant, almost ghostly hoot of an owl. Morrison kept looking back at Castellano, his expression a mixture of doubt and simmering impatience. "You sure about this, Jimmy? I don't see anything out of the ordinary." Castellano didn't answer directly, his eyes fixed on the murky shadows, his mind working through the kaleidoscope of colors and shapes he had etched onto his memory. He navigated not by traditional landmarks, but by the subtle hues and emotional markers of his internal map. A particularly gnarled oak, which might be just another tree to Morrison, was for Castellano a gnome's knuckles, a dark, twisted point on his mental compass. A section of uneven ground, usually unmarked, was dragon's scales, indicating a potential hidden crevice or defensive position. He felt the terrain, sensed its pulse through his synesthetic perception. They moved deeper towards the area Castellano had marked as grandmother's house, the place he felt was pretending to be what it's not. As they approached, the forest seemed to thicken, the darkness growing more oppressive. Morrison, peering through his night vision scope, still saw nothing concrete. "All right, Castellano, we're here. This is where your wolf in sheep's clothing is supposed to be. I see nothing but more trees and shadows. We should turn back. We're wasting time." He was ready to order the patrol to return, convinced this was a fool's errand, but Castellano stood rooted to the spot, his senses on high alert. "No, Sergeant, the colors are wrong. The darkness here, it's too dark too. Artificial. And listen." He paused, straining his ears. The forest was almost completely silent. No animal sounds, no birds. Not even the rustle of leaves. "It's an artificial silence, Sergeant. The forest is holding its breath and it smells purple." Morrison looked at him, bewildered. "It smells purple?" "Yes," Castellano insisted, a hint of desperation in his voice. "Purple, like something is trying too hard to be invisible, like it's hiding something big and ugly beneath it. It's the smell of danger, Sergeant. Trust me." There was an urgency in Castellano's voice, a raw conviction that finally swayed Morrison. The veteran sergeant, despite his skepticism, had learned to respect the inexplicable instincts of good scouts. He sighed, then nodded slowly. "All right, Castellano, one more grid square. If we find nothing, we're heading back, and you're explaining this purple smell to Colonel Bradford." Castellano led them forward, his movements even more cautious now. He dropped to his hands and knees, peering at the forest floor, his fingers delicately probing the fallen leaves and pine needles. Then his eyes widened. Barely visible, stretched taut between two small stumps, was a thin, almost translucent tripwire. It was connected to the pressure plate of a German Schuh Mine 42, a deadly anti-personnel mine designed to maim, not necessarily kill and demoralize. Had the patrol moved just a few more feet, the mine would have detonated, alerting the entire German position. Morrison, his skepticism evaporating instantly, froze. His hand shot up, signaling the patrol to halt. His heart pounded in his chest. Following the nearly invisible tripwire, they slowly, painstakingly, began to uncover more. One tripwire led to another, and then as the first faint hint of pre-dawn light filtered through the dense canopy, they began to see them. Perfectly camouflaged German positions. Not just a handful of foxholes, but an entire network of interlocking bunkers, machine gun nests and mortar pits. The artificial darkness Castellano had perceived was the deep shadow cast by meticulously constructed defensive positions, seamlessly integrated into the landscape. The revelation was shocking. What they had stumbled upon was not a small patrol or a few dugouts, but an entire battalion-strength ambush position, encompassing at least 400 German soldiers. There were multiple MG-42 machine gun nests, their deadly barrels positioned to sweep across the planned American advance route. Mortar positions were pre-registered, and interlocking fields of fire were carefully planned to shred any force that entered this killing zone. The planned American advance route, the very path Colonel Bradford's battalion was scheduled to take at 600, would have walked directly into a meat grinder. From Hauptmann Richter's perspective, his ambush was perfect. He had spent 2 weeks overseeing its construction, pushing his men to their limits, ensuring every detail was meticulously executed. The camouflage techniques employed by his company were elite, a seamless blend of natural and artificial materials, making their positions virtually invisible from the ground and undetectable by standard aerial reconnaissance. Richter's plan was simple and brutally effective. Allow the American forces to penetrate at least 200 meters into the kill zone, drawing them deep into the trap, before unleashing a torrent of fire from all sides. He estimated, with chilling precision, that the ambush would claim between 800 to 200 American lives in the first 10 minutes alone. The sheer concentration of firepower, coupled with the element of surprise in the confined, treacherous terrain of the Hurtgen forest, would have rendered the American forces helpless. Back on the American side, Morrison's patrol, hearts pounding, withdrew silently, carefully retracing their steps, every man acutely aware of the imminent catastrophe they had just averted. At 05:30 hours, an emergency briefing was called. Colonel Bradford, his face grim, listened intently as Sergeant Morrison, no longer skeptical, recounted the patrol's findings. Morrison spoke with a newfound respect for Castellano, detailing the discovery of the tripwires, the perfectly hidden positions, the sheer scale of the German preparations. Castellano, his small frame still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, displayed his color-coded map, explaining the purple smell of danger, the breadcrumb trail, and the wolf in sheep's clothing. The transformation on Colonel Bradford's face was stark. From deep skepticism, a dawning realization spread, giving way to a profound sense of awe and then grim determination. He looked at Castellano, a man he had almost dismissed, and saw not an eccentric artist, but a savior. He recognized, with a chilling clarity, the unique value of the scout's unconventional mind. The decision was made swiftly. The main advance would not proceed as planned. Instead, at 06:45 hours, the forest erupted, not with the crackle of small arms fire from a desperate American charge, but with the thunderous roar of American artillery. 6 batteries of 155mm howitzers, their massive barrels angled towards the German ambush site, unleashed a devastating barrage. 200 rounds of high-explosive shells rained down on the meticulously prepared German positions. The forest, which had been silent and deceptively still, was ripped apart by an inferno of steel, shrapnel, and fire. Richter's ambush, so carefully crafted, was annihilated before it could ever be sprung. As the smoke cleared, American forces advanced not along the deadly original route, but on an alternate path quickly mapped out and verified by Castellano's color-coded system. The German positions were devastated, the carefully constructed bunkers reduced to rubble, the machine gun nests silenced, the pre-registered mortar pits now just craters in the earth. Hauptmann Richter's entire defensive position had collapsed. The German casualties were staggering. 127 killed, over 200 wounded, many more captured. The strategic blow was immense. The American casualties from this operation were a mere 23 wounded and 4 killed, largely from residual skirmishes and stray sniper fire during the subsequent advance. A catastrophic ambush designed to wipe out an entire American battalion had been prevented with minimal loss of life. The aftermath of November 17, 1944, reverberated through the 28th Infantry Division. The immediate effect was the immense relief that swept through the ranks, quickly followed by questions about how such a perfectly concealed ambush had been detected. Private First Class James Castellano, the eccentric artist scout, was quickly nominated for and received the Bronze Star for valor and exceptional service. It was more than just a medal. It was the official recognition of the validity of his unique mapping technique. Captain Hayes, now an unwavering advocate, implemented Castellano's visual mapping system across several reconnaissance units within the division. He championed the idea that diverse modes of perception were vital in modern warfare, especially against an enemy as resourceful as the Germans. Sergeant Morrison, who had once scoffed at kindergarten cartography, publicly apologized to Castellano, his words thick with a newfound respect and a palpable sense of humility. "Jimmy," he had said, clapping him on the shoulder, "you saved our asses. Your crayons. They're damn magic, son." The psychological impact on the German side was profound. Hauptmann Richter, captured in the aftermath of the artillery barrage, was interrogated by Allied intelligence officers. He was bewildered, furious, and utterly disbelieving. "Impossible," he repeated, slamming his fist on the table. "Our camouflage was perfect. Your aerial reconnaissance showed nothing. We were invisible. How could you have known?" The intelligence officers, savoring the moment, informed him about Private First Class James Castellano, about the colored pencils, the children's storybooks, and the ridiculous mapping system that had exposed his perfectly hidden ambush. When he was told about Castellano's color-coded children's book mapping system, about the wolf in sheep's clothing, and the purple smell of danger, Richter's face drained of color. He simply stared, then whispered, a mix of disbelief and grudging admiration in his voice, "We were defeated by fairy tales?" Castellano's methods, initially dismissed, became a vital tool. He was pulled from frontline reconnaissance to train other scouts. Over the next few weeks, he taught 15 other hand-picked scouts how to cultivate their own visual associative mapping techniques, how to read the forest through a different lens, to look for the wrongness in an otherwise natural landscape. These trained scouts, guided by Castellano's principles, went on to detect and neutralize an estimated 40 additional hidden German positions, saving hundreds of additional lives during the brutal, drawn-out Hürtgen Forest campaign. His ridiculous method, once mocked, became a standard if specialized training module. When the war finally ended, James Castellano returned to Philadelphia, not as a failed commercial artist, but as a decorated veteran with a unique story to tell. He picked up his colored pencils once more, but this time the world was ready for his vision. He became a highly successful children's book illustrator, his whimsical yet deeply insightful art capturing the imaginations of a generation. His 1952 book, The Soldier's Colors, a thinly veiled autobiography that taught children about visual perception and the importance of seeing the unseen, became a bestseller, beloved for its simple beauty and profound message. The story of James Castellano is a powerful testament to the idea that innovation often comes from the most unexpected places, challenging conventional wisdom and rigid dogma. The ridiculous method that military professionals initially mocked ultimately became a crucial survival tool. Even today, the principles of non-traditional perception and visual intelligence analysis, refined and expanded, are incorporated into modern military training and intelligence gathering. The ability to see beyond the obvious, to interpret subtle anomalies, remains a vital skill in an increasingly complex world. Castellano's original map, with its vibrant red and yellow markings that read like a children's story, but told the truth that saved 800 lives, is preserved in the Army archives. A silent, colorful testament to the courage and unique genius of Private First Class James "Jimmy" Castellano. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.